Hello, everyone, and welcome to my channel. This is an educational channel. We check out great theories of everything, all encompassing theories, earth shattering discoveries, magnum opuses, tour de forces, grand unified theories, cosmologies, anything that gives you a kind of a holistic belief system. You can you can consult it for any answers that you're looking for, and we hope you can use these for your paradigm shifting or your awakening to 5D consciousness, your formation of a holistic worldview, your quest for better spiritual, mental, and physical health, including sovereignty and freedom. And today is our 180th video, no, 179th video that we've done called The Reciprocal Church, which is an attempt to kind of assemble spiritual, not only teachings, but procedures, descriptions, techniques, things that you can use to generate spiritual dimension to your life. We do this in response to the impending collapse of the spiritual matrix of the West here, with the discrediting of the Bible, both the New and Old Testaments, that we'll be getting into as well, that we'll be getting into here as well. So we're kind of about to get started with the biblical decode, New Testament decode. I'm going to start with the book of Luke, and but before we start that, we're going to look at some of the ways of decoding Luke and the rest of the New Testament. We've looked a lot at Joseph Atwill's ideas, and he will kind of serve as kind of a center point of how the Roman Caesars are the true authors of the Gospels, and it is a psyop, primarily through the vehicle of a person named Josephus, who wrote The War of the Jews and Antiquities of the Jews. And these books, which you may have heard of because Josephus is cited by Christians as the person that legitimates the whole religion, because he's the only first century commentator to actually mention Jesus. But then when you find out that Josephus was an agent of the Roman Flavian dynasty of Caesars from 69 to 96 AD, that is Vespasian, Titus, and Domitian, three emperors, a father and two sons, and how there are literally thousands of parallels between the War of the Jews and the New Testament. Then you begin to start smelling a rat and recognizing that it's just like everything else in modern society. It's all a psyop, and it's all a false flag, and it's all a scam, and everything that you believed in is not true. And once we do that, then we can begin to move on. Until then, we have great blockages, and the whole kind of red pill movement is really just a limited hangout. So that is what I would say about it, even though you might get really angry at me for doing so. But so Atwill, along with Michael Maniscalco, lay out this idea, and we've gone over that a little bit so far, but much more in the future. But we've also, I believe today is our 8th episode of going over the decode that is engendered by the Dead Sea Scrolls. And if you don't know, the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered in the mid-20th century in Qumran, about 20 miles from Jerusalem, in a bunch of jars. There's all these texts, ancient texts that were, scholars say, were buried in those caves in the 1st century BC or 1st century AD or so. And there's an entire, all the books of the Bible are represented except for Esther. And then there is a lot of sectarian material about the sect that lived there at Qumran, and what their rules and regulations and way of life and rituals and titles and so on, that are all very descriptive, especially since 1st century Palestine, and really 1st century anything, 1st century Rome entirely, has a complete lack of credible sources on the history of that time period. Josephus is usually cited as really the only authority on this time period, but if Josephus is really an agent of the Romans, the adopted son of Vespasian, which apparently is like Ben-Hur. Ben-Hur was adopted into a Roman nobility, I think like a century earlier or whatever, but I'll have to watch that sometime. But yeah, so Josephus is not really a reliable commentator. And certainly the New Testament is not reliable on its own to be a history of what happened, because of all the contradictions between the various. So, we're not talking about the symbolic or the lower levels of meaning. We're talking about the literal fundamentalist viewpoint that, all this happened and all this, is to be taken literally. And so we went over a lot of the codes of the Dead Sea Scrolls, the different languages, the different ways of interpreting. And those, in many cases, diverge from Joseph Atwill's point of view. In some other cases, do not, and or confirm them. So that's what we're going to try to do. We're going to try to kind of amass a whole quiver of decoding devices, and then get into the book of Luke and use all of them, because they're not mutually exclusive. And so we'll look at some of John Marco Allegro's stuff. We'll look at some of Robert Taylor's stuff. We looked at a lot of Barbara Thiering. And today, also this guy, Maurice Nicole. And today we're going to look a little bit at some of the work of Robert Eisenman. And Eisenman he was really the person that was most influential in getting the Dead Sea Scrolls lifted up from the so-called international team of scholars that was appointed to, once the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered, starting in 1947, they were mostly Catholic priests who were appointed to, read over these texts, mostly in Hebrew, but a little bit in Aramaic and a little bit in Greek. Read over these things and translate them and interpret them and get them back out to the scholars, and the lay public, so that everybody can get a chance to look at these things. These things are like a huge treasure of, especially fitting right into this vacuum of no scholarship whatsoever from the 1st century. And here we go, we have all these primary sources about what happened in the 1st century, but the international team were disappointed with the scrolls because they said stuff that they didn't believe in. They said things that were very hard to reconcile with their beliefs, and with their pronouncements. And so they began to start stalling, diverting, uh, by publishing other stuff, like less relevant stuff about the Dead Sea Scrolls, by hardly publishing anything at all, and by hoarding the documents so that nobody else could take a look at them. And they kept this up for like over 30 years. It took until the early 1990s that Eisenman, I believe he goes over it a little bit here, but that he kind of just started being a pain in their butt and just like threatened to, legal action, to get these things, the photographs at least of the texts, out for everybody to see them. There's really like 2 generations of scholars that were drooling to see these things that never did. So we're going to look at part of the introduction, or the preface. This is a 1,000-page long book, and I'm looking forward to getting into it, but I don't think we're going to do all that. But we are definitely going to look at this section of the preface, and then maybe a little bit of the preliminaries after that, and just get kind of an idea of, because this book is called the New Testament Code. And so this is Eisenman, who has read these Dead Sea Scrolls backwards and forwards, and he knows the history, and he's been down there and many times, and he's a scholar in this field. And so this is his actual true take of where these Dead Sea Scrolls fit into the scholarship, with all of the other, religious theological works that have been written since then. Okay, now he just gets done talking about a number of other, what he calls overseas messiahs, people who have legends, and in some cases, referrals from history that also featured a Jesus type figure. He refers to the Samaritan Taheb, is actually known to the book of Acts, and does appear in Acts 9:32-42. Their curious description of events surrounding Peter's miraculous curings and raisings at Lydda. But it is a cryptic reference, but he says, but we shall be able to decode it. And that generally is kind of the trigger for decoding, is when they make an offhand statement, or something that's kind of irrelevant, or an aside, or something that breaks the flow of the description, or doesn't seem to really add anything to the text. Most likely it's because it's in code. And that is the trigger that you're supposed to look for, the various ciphers that you might have at your disposal to go into a decode. I think the decodes can be anything from literal to metaphorical, to psychological, to conspiratorial, to entheogenical, and mythological, astronomical, and probably also botanical. So there's a lot of different ways that you can look at various languages in the New Testament, in the Bible in general. And we're going to try to unlock these and see if we can make some sense of it. I have kind of a quest here for doing this, because the person I wrote a book about, Sun Ra from Sun Ra's orchestra, the band leader, it was his his mission in life, even though he was an incredible musician and a savant and an incredible composer and very good at pretty much organizing a band, that his whole mission was to uh, figure out the most difficult problem on the planet, which he determined was the true meaning of the Bible. So he had a big stack of Bibles where he lived, and he said that the Creator taught him how to read all these different languages, and he said the Bible is not a good book, it's a code book. And I figured out the code, I figured out the truth of it, but the truth is a bad truth, is what he said. So we're going to dig into it. We're going to start right here in Robert Eisenman's New Testament Code. But all these things have to do with overseas messianism, as it were, or Neoplatonic mystery religion, salvationary or enlightenment literature outside of Palestine's or Judea's borders. This is not really what we are interested in or what is going to be the subject of this book, except peripherally. In this book, what we are interested in is messianism within the borders of Palestine, as the Romans called it, or the land of Judah, the wilderness of Judea, as the scrolls sometimes rather archaically refer it, and to some extent in the area contiguous to it to the east, as far north as northern Syria and northern Iraq. What to a certain degree we shall encounter in the terminology, the land of Damascus in the Dead Sea Scrolls. It is these documents that came to light or materialized, the Dead Sea Scrolls, and changed everything. The even more miraculous discovery than the Gospel of Judas, which is an apocryphal, or I think the Gospel of Judas is part of Nag Hammadi texts, although I'm not sure of that. It sounds like from the context that maybe it isn't. It sounds like it's separate. But he says, miraculous as it was, even more miraculous was the Dead Sea Scrolls. 19 centuries after they had seemingly been secreted away in caves, has come back to haunt us like some unexpected time capsule out of the past. Always I'm keeping in the back of my mind that this whole thing about the Dead Sea Scrolls could somehow also be a psyop. Even though it's probably not that easy to fake 2,000-year-old documents and such a huge quantity of them. 800 separate books. Books the size of books of the Bible, not like, but also just, it seems like it wouldn't exactly be worth, and why would they be suppressed then also? So, but I'm going to still keep it in the back of my mind that the whole thing about the Dead Sea Scrolls is a hoax. I don't believe that though, but I think it's still a possibility. Like a time capsule out of the past. Obviously, the people who wrote them and then deposited them or secreted them away did not therefore die in vain. It is these documents that have happened to change everything, finally giving us the tools to penetrate the darkness of how all these peculiar literary creations we now know came into being, and how the history of the Messianic movement in Palestine, as it would perhaps be best to call it, was transmuted into something entirely different, wholly alien and Greek, or perhaps more accurately, Egypto-Greco-Roman. But in any event, the very opposite of what was happening in Palestine, Judea, in these pivotally foundational times where the history of man and womankind is concerned. This is what, if someone with a more religious bent of mind were to describe it, is miraculous about their being found, and this almost exactly at the moment when the new Jewish state was in the process, it would appear, of being born. This is what gives us an entirely new perspective on these events, which those who came before us did not have, and therefore could not use in, for example, something like their quest for the historical Jesus. They did not have the control the scrolls provide, and had little or nothing to compare things with, for they did not know what a native Palestinian messianic movement might actually look like. A movement most people now content themselves by calling a scene. But now we do, and this makes all the difference. This is why our scholarship today is so different, and this is why we can now do research that our forebears and predecessors, even the most perceptive or incisive among whom, could not do, being often obliged to rely on what actually were mythologized, retrospective, or fantasizing presentations, like Josephus, and, obviously Acts and the Gospels, bordering even sometimes on dissimulation or disinformation. Now what we actually have before us here in these scrolls is the literature of the Messianic movement in Palestine. Homogeneous, pointed, unadulterated, and uncompromising. Call it by whatever name one might wish. Actually, what it really is the literature of extreme Naziritism. And therefore, probably somewhat boulderized New Testament nomenclature would be Nazarene, or even revolutionary or messianic Sadduceeism, also known, or therefore, Zadokitism. This is what I have been trying to point out in my several works over the last 20 or more years. This book came out in 2006. It was for these reasons, or at least this preface was written then. It was for these reasons, too, that I felt obliged to try to break the academic and scholarly monopoly and the literal stranglehold over the publication and interpretation of the Dead Sea Scrolls that previously obtained from approximately 1952 to 1991. In fact, ever since the international team took over responsibility for their publication. Or, as I expressed it elsewhere, to let a thousand voices sing. The only way to do this was to allow any interested person to approach all the documents that existed in a totally free manner, independent of mind-numbing academic analyses. And I put this forth in the introduction I did with Professor James Robinson of the University of Claremont, who incidentally was one of the main people who, he says, cleared up the log jam of the Nag Hammadi texts, which were discovered about 2 years before the Dead Sea Scrolls, and these are all Gospels and New Testament works from what you would call Gnostic, the Gnostic sects that put together the Gospel of Thomas, the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, and these texts were discovered before that, and there was a similar kind of obfuscation, but this guy James Robinson was one of the key individuals in breaking the Nag Hammadi log jam, and so Eisenman invited him to put together this preface for this book called the Facsimile Edition of the Dead Sea Scrolls. Having said this, it is the Dead Sea Scrolls that have, as if by some miracle, changed everything. He said this is the 4th time that he said changed everything, in case you want to think that there's some ambiguity here. They have given us the native Palestinian documents that did not go through and were left, as it were, untouched by the editorial processes of the Roman Empire. Either the reason or the result, obviously, of their having been put in caves in the first place. Again, an ancient time capsule, Palestinian messianism, before it went overseas and became Hellenized, or, Greekized, from the perspective, or really westernized, from the perspective of the present writer, an additional contradiction in terms. It is for this reason that these documents differ so much from the ones found, for example, at Nag Hammadi in Upper Egypt, or, for that matter, the Romanized Gospels. He calls the Gospels Romanized. Now, he's probably referring to later Roman Catholic Romanized, like from the all the editing and the deleting that the Roman Church did over the years. But he could also be referring to the first century Romanizing of the Gospels, as they have both been chosen for and come down to us. Here in the scrolls was real Palestinian messianism, as raw as it may seem, and at the same time, real Palestinian revolutionary apocalypticism. It is these documents that give us the yardstick, as just alluded to, along with a perspicacious reading of Josephus, saying, yeah, you can't really believe what you read in Josephus, maybe a thing or two here or there. And few other sources to measure the others. And as the Pseudo-Clementine homilies, which is a Clement was actually one of the Flavians, but he was the second pope, I believe, and he was of the royal family. There's two Clements, though. There's that Clement, that's a first century guy. He was actually executed by Domitian. But then there's Clement of Alexandria that came on later, and I'm not sure. I know there's Clementine material, but then there's also pseudo-Clementine material, and I'm not sure which is which. I'll try to figure it out. Pseudo-Clementine homilies, quote, Jesus as putting it, quote, to determine false coin from true. This I have tried to do in my work up until now, and for this too, I consider this generation to be a fortunate, even a blessed one. I did this in my earlier book, James, the Brother of Jesus, in 1997-98, and I have tried to do it in my other work. For example, in the collection of essays and translations, the Dead Sea Scrolls and the First Christians, from 1996. In James, the Brother of Jesus, I promised a sequel because 500 pages had been cut from the end of it, leaving it at only 1,000. Basically, the last 10 chapters of this book. So he put the last 500 pages into this book so that it wouldn't be 1,500. But in the meantime, other newer matters had been clarified for me, and the other subjects explored in far more detail and depth than I did in James, the Brother of Jesus, which accounts for the additional pages and the finally equal length of this, the New Testament Code. So 2 1,000-page books, and this is the latter. In James, the Brother of Jesus, I started the process of deciphering the modus operandi of the more literary, romantic portions of the Gospels and the book of Acts. This is to put things as kindly and diplomatically as possible. One thing Paul was not was literary romantic. A hater, not a lover. A polemicizer, not a conciliator or accommodator, and certainly not an artist. but he was a rhetorical dialectician and an allegorizer of the first order, though with hardly an ounce of human sympathy for those who might have opposed him or whom he thought stood in his way in some manner. And, like the Gospels and the book of Acts, hardly a historian at all. There's a great amount of scholarship, I think, starting to come out more and more that is fingering Paul as a spy of the Romans. And if you watch him roam around in the Acts and the epistles, it's like he's literally like a walking false flag. Every place he goes, there's like a riot, and he gets away because the Roman soldiers protect him. So I think that's pretty reasonable hypothesis. However, this is the sequel I promised at that time. Though it took years longer than I projected, I think I have gone about as far in the direction of such decipherment as one might. I do think that to some degree I have cracked the codes of some of the theological disinformation, as one of my more appreciative reviewers put it, involved in these documents. And I do think, as he also expressed it, that we are looking out at a hitherto unseen landscape of almost unimaginable beauty and splendor. This position was echoed by another reviewer, whom I seem to have struck as someone who has been shown a revelation of stunning splendor. Quote, I hope he is correct in this evaluation. Moreover, I hope my earlier and present readers will find this to be true, and that some of this landscape is either imparted to or shared with them. This is the most any author can legitimately hope for or has a right to expect from his work. Okay, let's read one more sentence here. Moreover, if Jesus were alive today, existent or non-existent in the form he has been presented to us, and if there had been things that had been done and said in his name that were not his, it is my view that he would expect, may require, his most sincere, ardent, and dedicated supporters and followers to find this out, there being nothing worse than having things done in or attributed to one's name in either life or legacy that were not one's own. All right, we're going to stop right there and resume this tomorrow when we return. Thanks for tuning in.